Welcome to your favorite medieval channel, the little corner of the internet that lovingly reminds you how good you've actually got it with your fancy flush toilets and, basic human rights. Seriously, count those blessings like they're the last bag of non-rat-infested grain in a famine. Today, we're kicking off an hilariously uncomfortable journey through the grimy, unglamorous bits of the past. We'll be diving deep into why certain medieval career paths were less climbing the ladder and more trying not to fall into a pit of despair and get eaten by wolves. And believe me, our first story, as suggested by today's rather pointed video title, is a real head-turner. It's a job that really makes you appreciate your soul-crushing office gig. Take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you're into this kind of historical self-torture. Because let's be honest, if you're here, you've got a certain refined curiosity for the grotesque, and I appreciate that about you. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? I love seeing which part of the world you're joining from. Let me know in the comments. It's always a morbid comfort to know who's sharing this historical nightmare fuel with me across the globe. Stick around. It's going to be awful. And hopefully you won't be able to sleep for days just pondering the sheer, unadulterated suckiness of it all. You might even wake up tomorrow feeling bizarrely grateful for your boring modern existence. You're welcome. Alright, picture this. Your life in some damp, dreary medieval town isn't exactly a walk in the park. You're probably wrestling with about 3 different kinds of fleas. Your diet is 90% stale bread and desperation. And your career prospects involve either shoveling manure or, if you're really ambitious, slightly more manure. Then, one sunny afternoon, as you're contemplating the existential dread of it all, a unique job opening is announced. The last guy who did this? Let's just say his tenure ended rather abruptly, possibly involving an angry mob and a convenient ditch. And look at you, unlucky you. Your name just got pulled from the metaphorical hat of doom. No interview, no tell me about your strengths, just a grim nod and a sinking feeling in your gut. Suddenly, you're the town's brand new state-sanctioned bringer of bad news, and even worse, last moments. The local authorities, probably a greasy-looking magistrate with all the charm of a damp cellar, explain your duties. They conveniently forget to mention the part where everyone you've ever known will now cross the street to avoid you, like you're wearing a sandwich board that says free leprosy hugs. Your social life just took a nosedive into a cesspit. Your Tinder profile, if such a horrifying anachronism existed, would be a barren wasteland. Consider yourself the original social pariah, now with added bloodstains. Your new office isn't exactly corner suite material, unless you count the corner of the town square where the pigeons go to die and the mud is thickest. Forget ergonomic chairs. You get a rickety wooden platform, probably assembled by someone who was paid in lukewarm ale and clearly hated their job. It's splintery, unstable, and permanently stained with, well, let's call them work-related incidents. This is where you'll be performing, rain or shine, much to the morbid curiosity of the local populace. The acoustics are terrible for your victim's last words, but great for the jeers of the crowd. First day on the job, and the butterflies in your stomach aren't from excitement. They're from sheer, abject terror, mixed with last night's questionable stew. You're probably hoping for something simple, right? Maybe just a stern lecture delivered from atop your wobbly stage. Nope. Your inaugural task is unlikely to be a clean, swift beheading. More likely, it's a public flogging, or perhaps branding someone with a hot iron that you had to heat up yourself over a smoky, reluctant fire. Remember that strong stomach requirement? This is where it gets its first real test. Good luck with your performance review. Let's talk about your tools. Don't expect a gleaming set of precision-engineered implements lovingly displayed in a velvet-lined case. You get a collection of rusty, heavy, and frankly quite disgusting items. An axe that's seen better centuries, a whip that looks like it was used to tame a dragon, unsuccessfully, and various pokey, burny things that defy easy description but promise a world of hurt. And guess who gets to clean and maintain them? That's right, you do. Hope you enjoy sharpening blades that have been intimately acquainted with human anatomy. It's basically medieval arts and crafts, but with more screaming. So what about the pay for this delightful career? Surely, for a job this specialized and, shall we say, unpopular, you're rolling in coin, right? Wrong. So very, very wrong. You might get a pittance from the town council, barely enough to keep your lice-ridden clothes from falling apart completely. Sometimes, you might be entitled to the victim's clothes, assuming they haven't been soiled beyond recognition or aren't just rags to begin with. You're not building a retirement fund here. You're basically bartering for your next meal, which, by the way, you'll probably eat alone. Your LinkedIn profile would just say, "It's complicated," and then there's the crowd, your audience. Every single time you step onto that charming stage of yours, they'll be there. Men, women, children, all gathered for the free entertainment. They're not there to cheer you on, mind you. They're there for the spectacle, the gore, the thrill of not being the one on the receiving end. They'll heckle, they'll throw rotten vegetables, or worse. And if you botch the job, oh boy. Think of the worst online comment section you've ever seen, then give it pitchforks and a distinct lack of impulse control. You're not just an executioner, you're a reluctant, underpaid reality TV star. Now, if you thought your job was just about the dramatic swing of an axe, you're in for a rude awakening. That's just the headline act. Your job description is a smorgasbord of unpleasantness. You're also the official torturer. Got a stubborn witness? Your problem. Need a confession? Any confession? Send them to your little workshop. You'll also be in charge of disposing of the bodies. No biohazard suits or council pickups here. And sometimes you might even have to deal with rabid dogs or other problem animals. You're a one-stop shop for everything gruesome and unpopular. You're living. Arrangements will be just as delightful as your job. You won't be residing in a nice, centrally located apartment with friendly neighbors. Nope. You'll be on the absolute fringes of town, probably in a dilapidated shack next to the gallows, the cemetery. Or, if you're really lucky, the town's open sewer. Your kids, if you're unfortunate enough to have any in this line of work, will have a fascinating time explaining to their friends where Daddy goes to work. He helps people leave town permanently. Property values plummet wherever you set up shop. Let's not forget the psychological perks, or rather, the complete and utter devastation of your mental state. How do you unwind after a long day of, well, that? There are no medieval therapists, no mindfulness apps, no chamomile tea strong enough to erase the sights, sounds, and smells of your profession. Every scream, every thud, every pleading gaze will be etched into your memory. Sleep will be less of a refuge and more of a highlight reel of your daily horrors. Your medieval Fitbit would track 0 restful nights. Ever. And if the living aren't bad enough, you've also got the whole supernatural angle to contend with. In a world steeped in superstition, you, my friend, are basically a walking, talking bad omen. People will whisper that you're cursed, that you consort with dark spirits, or that your touch can curdle milk from 3 villages away. Children will run from you, not just because of your job, but because their parents have filled their heads with tales of the spooky executioner. This doesn't exactly help with making friends or finding a date for the spring festival. Your aura, permanently set to avoid at all costs. Thinking of handing in your notice? Submitting a strongly worded letter of resignation to the town council, citing unpleasant working conditions and excessive existential dread? Good luck with that. This isn't a gig you apply for. It's a sentence you serve. Often, it's a job for life, your life, however short or miserable it may be. And the real kicker? It can be hereditary. That's right, you can pass this bundle of joy onto your kids. Congratulations, son, you've inherited my axe and crippling social isolation. The ultimate family curse. So there you are, day in, day out, stuck in this medieval nightmare. Your hands are stained, your soul is weary, and your only companions are the ghosts of your clients and the jeers of the crowd. Every sunrise brings the potential for new horrors, new ways for your life to suck just a little bit more. You look at your reflection in a murky puddle and wonder how things ever got this bad. And the truly terrifying part? This is just the beginning of your delightful career. Tomorrow you've got a triple beheading. Try to get some sleep. So, you've somehow survived your initial baptism by fire, or rather, by rusty axe and the collective stink eye of your entire community. You figured, okay, I'm the local pariah. The guy who makes children cry and milk curdle just by existing. Surely it plateaus here, right? The misery-o-meter can't possibly go higher. Oh, you adorable optimist. You've already mastered the art of looking grimly stoic while your insides are churning like a butter churn of pure regret, TM. You're now intimately familiar with the symphony of human suffering. The subtle shift in the crowd's mood from morbid curiosity to outright bloodlust, and the unique aroma of fear mixed with unwashed medieval bodies which, frankly, could knock a buzzard off a carrion cart. But Gareth, your one-man HR department, the one with the impressively distracting nose wart, has just handed you an updated scroll of responsibilities. Turns out, swinging the axe was just the warm-up act. Your medieval misery subscription just got upgraded to premium. First on your expanded checklist of horrors, the delicate art of torture. Oh, you thought your job was just about quick, clean dispatch. Bless your medieval cotton socks. Now you're also the guy who has to persuade information out of people. Your toolkit expands to include thumbscrews that look suspiciously like ancient garlic presses of doom, racks that could double as terrible Pilates reformers, and various implements of discomfort that would make a modern-day HR department spontaneously combust. You're expected to be creative, yet efficient, to extract a confession without, accidentally rendering the confessor incapable of speech or life. It's a fine line, like trying to assemble IKEA furniture in the dark, but with significantly more screaming and a much higher chance of someone losing a limb. You're basically a medieval project manager for pain. Beyond the grim theatrics of capital punishment and the shadowy dread of the torture chamber, your talents are also required for public humiliations, because medieval society really loved its daytime drama. You're the one who gets to lock people in the pillory or the stocks, essentially turning them into a human dartboard for rotten fruit, dead rats, and the unfiltered opinions of their fellow citizens. Fancy a bit of dunking? You'll be operating the dunking stool, repeatedly submerging some poor soul accused of witchcraft or just being a bit gobby into the filthiest water you can find. It's like managing the world's worst water park ride, where the only thrill is profound degradation and the high probability of catching some new exciting waterborne disease. Your resume is starting to look less like a list of skills and more like a catalog of human misery. And let's not forget the, medical-adjacent duties. When the main event is over, guess who's responsible for cleanup? You are. Hauling bodies off the scaffold, sometimes having to quarter them for display on the city gates. Because nothing says welcome to Oakhaven like a dismembered traitor. You might even be called upon for crude anatomical tasks. Got a barber surgeon who fancies a bit of highly illegal dissection for research? You might be the one procuring the specimen. And stray diseased animals? Also your department. You're the town's unofficial, unpaid, and deeply resented biohazard disposal unit. Forget a hazmat suit. You're lucky if you get a pair of gloves that don't have holes in them. You're basically a medieval ghostbuster, but instead of ghosts, it's actual guts. Remember that meager pay we talked about? Let's delve into the joys of actually using it. Try buying a loaf of bread when the baker knows your coins are, quite literally, blood money. They'll either refuse you outright, muttering something about curses and ill omens, or they'll charge you triple with a side of visible disgust. Your money is tainted, a physical manifestation of your reviled profession. Forget online banking. Your financial transactions are a masterclass in social awkwardness and thinly veiled contempt. You might as well be trying to pay with actual plague rats. The economic anxiety is real, folks. You're not just professionally ostracized. You're financially blacklisted by pretty much everyone with a pulse and something to sell. What about a personal life, you ask? A loving spouse, a couple of rosy-cheeked children to carry on your... Oh, wait. That's the problem, isn't it? Finding someone willing to marry the town executioner is like trying to find a vegetarian at a Viking feast. And if you do, by some miracle or act of profound desperation, manage to start a family, they're pariahs by extension. Your kids will be bullied relentlessly, your spouse shunned at the market. And the hereditary nature of the job? That's a dark cloud that hangs over your family like a perpetual medieval smog. Daddy, what did you do at work today? Suddenly becomes a conversation you'd rather have with a block of wood. Your family gatherings are probably less festive cheer and more shared silent dread. The daily grind of your existence is less about skill and more about psychological endurance. Does a part of you die with every act, or do you become a hollowed-out shell, desensitized to the suffering you inflict and witness? There's no off switch. You can't just clock out and leave the horrors at the scaffold. They follow you home, to your isolated shack, seep into your watery stew, and dance behind your eyelids when you try to sleep. Your dreams are probably a bizarre mashup of Hieronymus Bosch paintings and a really bad day at a medieval abattoir. You're living in a state of perpetual low-grade trauma, with the occasional spike of high-grade terror. Forget mindfulness. You're mastering mindfulness of all the things you wish you could forget. And then there are the days when things go spectacularly, horribly wrong. A botched execution is every executioner's nightmare, and a surprisingly common occurrence with those less-than-perfect tools and a struggling, terrified victim. One misplaced swing of the axe, and instead of a swift end, you've created a gruesome spectacle of prolonged agony. The crowd, once baying for blood, might turn on you. Your client is suffering. Their family is probably screaming curses at you, and the local magistrate is giving you a look that promises a very unpleasant performance review. There's no instant replay, no supervisor to step in. Just you, your mistake, and a very angry, very medieval mob. Suddenly, that strong stomach isn't just for the gore, it's for the crushing weight of your own catastrophic failures. The years have crawled by like a wounded slug over cold, unforgiving cobblestones, each one etching deeper lines of, let's call it world weariness, onto your face and into your soul. You're no longer the jumpy, terrified newbie who flinched at every shadow and apologized to the condemned under your breath. Oh no. You're a seasoned veteran in the grand, gruesome theater of medieval misery, a household name whispered with a delicious shiver of dread, synonymous with really bad last days and the kind of justice that leaves a permanent stain, both on the scaffold and your conscience. When parents want to scare their children into eating their suspicious gray vegetables, they don't invoke some mythical bogeyman. They just hiss your name, and little Timmy suddenly develops an appetite. You've become a local legend, the reluctant star of your own involuntary horror franchise, consistently renewed for another season of suffering whether you consent or not. Your morning commute through the town square is less a casual stroll and more like the parting of the Red Sea, if the sea was made of terrified peasants and smelled faintly of unwashed linen and existential dread. Each person scurries away as if you're personally radiating the Black Death, the director's cut. The isolation that once felt like a fresh, gaping wound has now calloused over into a permanent, numb ache, a dull throb in the background of your existence. You don't just do a terrible job anymore. You are the terrible job, personified, a walking, talking monument to everything medieval society preferred to keep at arm's length, but couldn't live without. Your medieval LinkedIn profile, if it dared exist, would simply read, Chief Morbidity. Officer, extensive experience in terminal negotiations. References available upon very unlikely request. You're basically a medieval celebrity no one wants an autograph from. Your relationship with the local authorities, the portly magistrates, the sneering reeves, perhaps even the occasional, bored-looking minor noble who enjoys a good public dispatching, is a masterclass in medieval hypocrisy. They need you. You're the rusty, blood-stained cog that keeps their particular brand of social order grinding along. You're the one who does the dirty work they wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, even if that pole was wrapped in silk and perfumed with rosewater. They summon you with a curt nod, give you your grim instructions in hushed tones usually reserved for discussing embarrassing relatives, and then dismiss you like a bad smell, probably making a great show of washing their hands afterwards. You're their necessary evil, their walking, talking, get out of jail, or rather, keep people in terror. Free card. You're less an employee and more a highly unpleasant but utterly essential software update they have to install to prevent societal system crashes. They look down on you from their high horses, both literal and metaphorical, conveniently forgetting that you're the reason they can sleep soundly, untroubled by peasant uprisings or an excess of unpunished heretics. Their gratitude is as invisible as their dental hygiene. Are there any perks to being the most feared and loathed person in a 50-mile radius? Well, if you squint really hard and tilt your head maybe, you can probably clear out a crowded tavern just by walking in the door. Not because they respect you, but because your presence is the medieval equivalent of a skunk spraying directly into the air conditioning. The local toughs and aspiring criminals might give you a wide berth, a sort of grudging professional courtesy, or perhaps they just don't want to end up as one of your future clients. You likely get first dibs on, well, nothing much, because who's going to offer it to you? Perhaps the only real privilege is the profound, unsettling silence that surrounds you. A personal bubble of fear that ensures no one ever asks to borrow a cup of sugar. You're the ultimate medieval anti-influencer. Your brand is so toxic, it's practically radioactive. These aren't perks. They're just different flavors of isolation, small, bitter victories that only underscore how truly, royally screwed your social life is. Let's chat about workplace health and safety, or rather, the hilarious lack thereof in your particular profession. Your daily routine involves close, personal contact with blood, gore, and individuals suffering from a delightful smorgasbord of medieval diseases. There's no PPE, no antibacterial hand sanitizer, no post-trauma counseling. You're one poorly aimed struggle away from a serious injury, inflicted either by the condemned or by your own clumsy, gore-slicked tools. Every cut or scrape isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's an open invitation to gangrene, sepsis, or some other flesh-eating horror that medieval medicine would probably treat by bleeding you with leeches or suggesting you pray harder. The chronic stress, the constant exposure to violence, the poor diet of stale bread and societal contempt, it all takes a toll on your physical well-being. Your life expectancy is probably somewhere south of optimistic. You're essentially playing Russian roulette with your immune system every single day, and the chamber is mostly full. Thank your lucky stars for modern antibiotics and OSHA regulations, because you, my medieval friend, have neither. Then comes the day you get a high-profile assignment. It's not your usual petty thief or village drunkard who mouthed off to the wrong person. This time, it's someone important, a disgraced knight who chose the wrong side in some feudal squabble, a merchant prince accused of treason, or a charismatic heretic whose followers are still lurking in the shadows, probably sharpening pointy things and muttering your name. Suddenly, the pressure triples, the crowd is bigger, more volatile. The local lord and his entourage are watching from a specially constructed viewing platform. Their faces a mixture of grim satisfaction and barely concealed nervousness. Every move you make is scrutinized. A clean, efficient job means you get to keep your own head. A botch? That doesn't just mean an angry mob. It could mean angering some very powerful people who have very long memories and access to even bigger, scarier executioners than you. This isn't just another day at the office. This is your medieval Super Bowl of suffering, and you're the only player on your team. As the sun sets on another delightful day of medieval justice, and you trudge back to your hovel on the edge of town, what occupies your thoughts? The mortgage? Your fantasy football league? Not quite. You're probably contemplating your legacy, or lack thereof, beyond that guy who killed a lot of people. Will anyone remember your name for anything other than fear and bloodshed? The hereditary nature of your craft means you're not just living a cursed life. You're potentially passing that curse down to your children, a family heirloom no one wants. Is there any escape from this cycle? Any chance for redemption, a quiet retirement to a secluded turnip farm? Let's be brutally honest. Probably not. This isn't a career path with a golden parachute. It's a life sentence. There's a grim acceptance that settles in, a weary resignation to your fate. You are what you do, and what you do is frankly appalling. The best you can hope for is that the next victim goes quickly, and the crowd finds something else to throw besides rocks. Let's delve into the fascinating, albeit deeply depressing world of medieval microeconomics. Specifically, your unique and unenviable corner of the market. Your official salary from the town council, a term we use loosely, like calling a puddle an ocean, is probably just enough to prevent you from immediately starving or freezing to death in your drafty hovel. It's a pathetic pittance that screams, "We technically paid him, so our hands are clean-ish." But what about those lucrative side hustles? In a grim medieval sort of way, they exist. Sometimes, a condemned person's wealthy family might discreetly slip you a few extra coins for a swifter service. A sharper axe, a stronger rope ensuring a quicker snap, a mercifully efficient end before the crowd gets too inventive with their projectiles. Or perhaps they'll pay you not to display the quartered remains quite so prominently over the entrance to the Pig and Whistle Tavern, as it understandably dampens the festive mood. You might also claim certain perquisites, like the victim's meager clothing, assuming it's not just rags soaked in unmentionable fluids and last regrets, or the rope used for a hanging, a macabre souvenir some superstitious souls believed held grim magical properties, though who'd actually buy it from you? The walking embodiment of bad juju is another matter entirely. So, you're essentially a freelance misery merchant, nickel and diming your way through a life of abject horror. You're not building an investment portfolio for your golden years in the sunny south of France, are you? More like desperately trying to afford a slightly less moldy loaf of bread that the baker will only sell you if you stand 20 paces downwind, and he flings it in your general direction using a pair of tongs. Your financial advisor, had one existed brave or foolish enough to associate with you, would have just burst into tears, downed a flagon of ale, and recommended aggressive prayer. This isn't earning a living, it's barely postponing death by poverty, one severed head or stretched neck at a time. Your medieval Venmo would be called Pay Me in Pain. Imagine your medieval daily planner if you dared to own such an optimistic item. Monday. Wake up cold and miserable. Breakfast. Stale crust. Regret. Mid-morning. Public flogging of that baker who overcharged me. Just kidding. That's a fantasy. Actual task. Flog someone else. Lunch. More stale crust. Existential dread. Afternoon. Drag a condemned heretic to the stake. Try not to catch fire myself. Evening. Attempt to wash off the smell of burnt fanaticism and despair. Dinner. If lucky, a turnip. Sleep. Interrupted by nightmares of screaming faces and the judgmental stares of town pigeons. This is your life, a relentless cycle of grim duties, punctuated by moments of profound loneliness and the constant, gnawing hunger that no amount of watery stew can truly satisfy. Your commute is a gauntlet of averted gazes and muttered curses. Preparing your tools is less about craftsmanship and more about ensuring they're just sharp or heavy enough to get the appalling job done, hopefully on the first try. The event itself is a blur of noise, smells, and the crushing weight of your role. Cleanup is, well, cleanup. And your evenings? They're spent in splendid isolation, perhaps whittling a stick into a slightly sharper stick, or just staring into the dying embers of your fire, wondering if there's a circle in Dante's Inferno specifically for people in your profession. The soul-crushing monotony of it all is a torture in itself, a medieval Groundhog Day where every day is just a different shade of awful. Feeling a bit under the weather? Got that nasty cough that's been going around the plague-ridden parts of town. Tough luck, Buttercup. There are no sick days in the medieval executioner's handbook. The show, as they say in a much later, more glamorous context, must go on. Justice, or the medieval approximation thereof, waits for no man's sniffles or debilitating back spasms from hauling corpses. If there's a beheading scheduled, you'd better be there. Axe polished, and game face on. Your game face being your usual expression of weary resignation, perhaps with a hint of feverish glaze. What if you break your arm wrestling a particularly uncooperative client? You learn to swing an axe one-handed, or tie a noose with your teeth, presumably. There's no medieval temp agency dispatching substitute executioners. Greetings, I'm Brian, your interim headsman for the week. The pressure to perform, regardless of your own physical agony or mental anguish, is immense. And holidays? Christmas, Easter, the Feast of St. Swithin, the slightly damp? Those are just regular workdays for you. Possibly with a larger, more festive crowd eager to see some suffering to take their minds off their own. Your work-life balance is spectacularly unbalanced, leaning heavily towards work that makes you wish for the sweet release of the life you're about to take. You thought the axe, the whip, and the noose were bad? Oh, you sweet, innocent medieval lamb. As you progress in your charming career, you become an unwilling expert in a wider, more specialized array of tools and techniques, an artisan of agony. Burning at the stake for heresy? That requires a certain finesse in pile construction to ensure maximum spectacle, and, if you're feeling unusually kind, minimum prolonged agony, though kindness isn't usually in your job description. Breaking on the wheel? A truly horrific affair involving methodically shattering limbs, requiring a grim understanding of human anatomy and a strong stomach for the symphony of snapping bones. Drowning, pressing, drawing, and quartering. Each delightful method has its own grotesque ritual, its own set of specialized, often custom-made implements that probably sit in your shed like a demonic golf bag. You're forced to acquire this gruesome knowledge, to learn the subtle differences in how to inflict maximum pain or ensure a, relatively, quicker dispatch depending on the crime, the victim's social standing, or the specific instructions from your overlords. You're not just an executioner, you're a highly specialized, deeply reluctant professor of applied medieval brutality, with a PhD in pain and a tenure track to eternal damnation. If you were foolish or desperate enough to acquire a family, they're not living some idyllic medieval rom-com life on the other side of town while you're off doing your gruesome 9-to-5. No. They're right there in the splash zone of your professional infamy. Your spouse, if they haven't already run off with a traveling lute player, who suddenly seems like a fantastic catch in comparison, is likely as ostracized as you are, struggling to buy food, enduring the whispers and the cold shoulders at the well. And your children? They're the executioner's kids. Think about their school days, if they even get to go to school. They're the pariahs of the playground, the ones no one wants to share their mud pies with. They face taunts, threats, and the constant crushing weight of their fathers, or mothers, though less common, profession. What future do they have, except perhaps to inherit your blood-stained tools and your shack by the gallows? The idea of a normal childhood for them is a cruel joke. Every time you look at them, you see not just your offspring, but the next potential link in a chain of hereditary misery. You're not just ruining your own life, you're providing a multi-generational curse, a family legacy that smells faintly of iron and regret. It's the medieval gift that keeps on giving. Everyone, the Creeps. Let's explore the vibrant social scene available to you. The town's official bringer of doom. Spoiler. It's less vibrant, and more various shades of bleak desperation. You're not exactly getting invited to medieval weekend brunches or artisanal, cheese-making workshops. Your social calendar is as barren as a field after a locust swarm. Your primary associates, by geographical necessity and professional hazard, are often the very dregs of society you're paid to. Well, process. The thieves, the murderers, the desperate souls caught on the wrong side of incredibly harsh laws, the assorted ne'er-do-wells who either pass through your blood-stained hands professionally or inhabit the same shadowy, stinking alleys that you might begrudgingly call your neighborhood. It's a peculiar sort of unwilling professional courtesy. They certainly don't like you. You're the guy who's going to end them or their mates after all. But they understand your grim function in this delightful medieval ecosystem. Perhaps a condemned man, reeking of cheap ale and palpable terror, offers you his last few tarnished coins, or a pathetic swig from his hidden flask in a desperate plea for a cleaner job, a quicker exit from this mortal coil. Maybe a seasoned pickpocket, awaiting his turn for a branding that will ruin his career, gives you a grudging nod of recognition, one outcast to another, both trapped in society's underbelly like rats in a poorly maintained drain. You're not friends, certainly not colleagues in any conventional sense, just unwilling participants in the same relentless medieval misery play, directed by forces far beyond your control. You become the unwilling confessor to the damned, the last unsmiling face many of them will ever see, privy to their whispered regrets, their defiant curses, their pathetic justifications. These aren't connections that enrich your life or offer solace. They're just more heavy threads in the ever-expanding, suffocating tapestry of your despair. Your networking events are held at the foot of the gallows, and the main topic of conversation is usually some variation of, "Please, for the love of all that's holy, don't botch this." It's like being permanently stuck in the world's worst reality TV show, where everyone eventually gets voted off the island, permanently. And you're the one contractually obliged to push them off the plank. Your LinkedIn connections would be a who's who of short-term acquaintances. And what about the so-called respectable folk? The pious merchants, the learned clerks, the virtuous town council members who sign your work orders with a flourish and a self-satisfied smirk. Their hypocrisy is a stench that often outdoes the charnel pit on a warm day. Publicly, they'll treat you like something they scraped off their shoe, gathering their robes about them lest they be contaminated by your very presence. But privately? That's a different story. You might get a furtive knock on your hovel door late at night. It's Master Guildsman Theodore, face hidden in the shadows of his hood, voice a low whisper. He needs a fresh corpse for his nephew, the barber surgeon, to practice on. Strictly for medical advancement, of course, and definitely not for some ghoulish curiosity. Or perhaps Lady Agnes needs you to discreetly dispose of a problematic letter, or maybe even a problematic former servant who knew too much. You're their dirty little secret, their moral septic tank, the one they turn to when their pristine reputations require some off-the-books unpleasantness. They'll pay you, of course, in coins that feel heavier for the unspoken shame attached, and then they'll scurry back to their comfortable lives, leaving you in the darkness with their sullied secrets and your own compromised soul. You're the medieval equivalent of a reputation management service that uses an axe instead of a delete button. In the quiet, desolate hours between one grim task and the next, do you ever find yourself thinking? Does a sliver of doubt ever penetrate the calloused shell you've built around your heart? You're standing on the scaffold, the condemned person before you protesting their innocence with a raw, desperate conviction that, just for a second, makes you pause. You see the terror in their eyes, the way their hands tremble, and a cold knot forms in your stomach. Could they be telling the truth? Could you be about to send an innocent soul to meet their maker, based on the flimsy evidence of a biased magistrate, or the coerced testimony of a tortured witness. But what can you do? You're not a detective. You're not a judge or jury. Your job is to swing the axe, tie the noose, light the pyre. To question the verdict is to question the entire system that employs you. A system that would crush you, without a second thought, if you stepped out of line. So you swallow your doubts, push down that flicker of conscience, and get on with it. The powerlessness is an additional layer of torment, a constant reminder that you're just a tool, a weapon, in the hands of others. Your medieval mission statement is basically, ours is not to reason why, ours is but to do or die, and make others die too. Let's revisit the ever-present joy of medieval occupational hazards, specifically the delightful array of diseases just waiting to make your acquaintance. You're practically marinating in contagion. Every execution, every act of torture, every body disposal is a fresh opportunity to contract something truly memorable. We're talking rampant infections from nicks and cuts sustained while wrestling with a struggling victim or handling rusty, contaminated tools. Think erysipelas, a lovely skin infection that turns you red and swollen, or good old-fashioned gangrene, turning your extremities black and fragrant. Then there's the constant exposure to blood and other bodily fluids, a veritable cocktail of pathogens. Dysentery is practically your roommate, typhus a frequent houseguest. And let's not forget the ever-popular plague, carried by the rats that are probably your closest, if uninvited, companions in your squalid living quarters near the charnel pits or the town dump. Modern sanitation workers have gloves, masks, biohazard protocols, and, access to actual medicine. You've got a rag to wipe your hands on, if you're lucky. And the robust medieval belief that illness is probably due to an imbalance of your humors or a punishment from God for, being you. Your immune system isn't just fighting battles. It's engaged in a full-scale, never-ending medieval war, armed with nothing but hope and a strong suspicion it's losing. As the years bleed into decades, a grim tally starts to accumulate in the blood-soaked ledger of your mind. How many lives have you personally, directly, irrevocably ended? How many souls have you dispatched? How many bodies have you mutilated? How many screams have you unwillingly catalogued? Dozens? Hundreds? After a while, do the faces blur into a single composite mask of terror and pain? Or does each one remain, a tiny sharp splinter lodged in your memory, pricking you in the dead of night? The sheer weight of numbers, the cumulative burden of all that suffering, would be enough to crush a modern mind equipped with therapy and Prozac. You, however, have only the judgmental silence of your hovel and the increasingly frantic whispers of your own unraveling sanity. You are a walking, talking cemetery, each step haunted by the ghosts of those you've sent into the next world. Some executioners were rumored to keep notches on their axe handles or knots in a rope. Whether you do or not, the tally exists, branding your soul with an invisible, indelible mark. You're not just an instrument of death. You're a collector of last breaths, a reluctant archivist of agony. Your main contribution to the census is in the departures column. In an age where God and the devil are as tangible as the mud on your boots and the ever-present threat of dysentery, where do you, the town's officially sanctioned dispatcher of souls, seek spiritual comfort? The local church, perhaps? You might try, on a particularly bleak Sunday, to slip into the back pew, hoping for a moment of peace, a sliver of divine understanding, a brief respite from the gnawing emptiness inside. But the collective, audible gasp from the congregation, the way women clutch their children and men instinctively reach for improvised weapons, like a particularly hefty prayer book, and the sudden, conspicuous empty space that radiates outwards from you are hardly conducive to quiet contemplation or spiritual uplift. It's like trying to meditate in the middle of a particularly judgmental stampede, if the stampede was composed entirely of people who are pretty sure you personally fist-bump demons before breakfast. The parish priest, a man whose face is a permanent mask of weary disapproval when he looks at you, probably crosses himself with a speed that would impress an acrobat and mutters a quick prayer for divine protection whenever you shuffle past, reeking of despair and faintly of iron oxide from your tools. Confession? Imagine that conversation. Forgive me, Father, for I have, well, you know, it's been another busy week in the dispatch department. Another half-dozen souls expedited to your general vicinity. The penance would probably involve single-handedly rebuilding the entire cathedral, using only your teeth and good intentions. The church offers solace and redemption to the flock, but you're the wolf they reluctantly keep just outside the fold. A necessary, terrifying monster to keep the sheep in line. Your soul is so stained, you figure it's probably visible from heaven, and not in a good, shining beacon of righteous light kind of way. Any prayers you dare to offer probably get automatically rerouted to the celestial spam folder, marked Return to Sender, Address Unknown, and frankly, we'd prefer it stay that way. You're not just outside God's grace, you're practically in a different divine postal code. So if divine solace is off the table, what about more earthly comforts? A flagon of cheap, rough ale down at the seediest tavern in town? The one that doesn't immediately throw you out on sight? You might try to drown your sorrows, to numb the endless reel of horrific memories that plays behind your eyelids every time you try to rest. For a few blessed moments, the muddy, potent brew might dull the edges of your despair, blurring the faces of the damned and softening the phantom screams that echo in your ears. But the escape is fleeting, and the morning after is a special kind of medieval hell. Your head pounds like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, your stomach churns with rebellion, and the existential dread returns with a vengeance, now accompanied by a throbbing hangover and the taste of regret and stale beer. Your liver, if it could talk, would probably be staging a very vocal protest, possibly involving picket signs and strongly worded demands for a new owner. This isn't self-medication. It's just borrowing a sliver of oblivion from tomorrow's misery, with crippling interest rates. You're essentially trying to put out a grease fire with more grease. The only thing you're successfully pickling is your own internal organs, and even they seem to be looking for an exit strategy. The relentless years of stress, poor nutrition that consists mainly of whatever hasn't visibly rotted yet, untreated injuries, and constant, intimate exposure to every foul disease medieval Europe has to offer are now staging a mutiny against your own body. Your joints creak and groan with every movement, a symphony of arthritic pops that provides a grim soundtrack to your already miserable existence. Your eyesight, once sharp enough to spot a flinch from 100 paces, is now blurring, making the already challenging task of a clean axe stroke even more of a gamble. That persistent cough you've developed? It's probably not just a common cold. It's more likely the opening act for consumption or some other delightful lung affliction that medieval medicine can only treat with a shrug and a suggestion to avoid drafts. You're aging like sour milk, not fine wine. Every morning, you drag your aching, weary body from your flea-ridden pallet, feeling less like a man and more like a loosely assembled collection of failing parts, held together by sheer stubbornness and the terrifying knowledge that if you stop, you starve. You're a walking, talking advertisement for the benefits of modern healthcare and a balanced diet, mostly by being a terrifying example of their absence. Let's revisit the ever-present horror of a botched job, because it's not some abstract fear. It's a recurring nightmare that occasionally bursts into your waking life with the subtlety of a trebuchet through a stained glass window. Imagine this. The crowd is larger than usual, buzzing with a particularly vicious energy. The condemned is a local rabble-rouser, popular with some, loathed by others. The pressure is immense. You swing your axe. Maybe the light is bad, maybe your hand trembles from last night's cheap ale or this morning's egg, and you miss. Not a clean cut, but a sickening, tearing thud. The victim doesn't die. They scream, a sound that cuts through the sudden horrified silence of the mob before it erupts into a furious roar. Blood is everywhere, a grotesque parody of a surgeon's worst day. The victim is writhing, their family wailing, and the guards are looking at you with a mixture of pity and "you're on your own, mate." You have to strike again and again, each blow a fresh wave of nausea for you, and renewed fury from the crowd, who are now screaming for your blood. They start throwing rocks, refuse, anything they can lay their hands on. You're no longer the detached instrument of justice, you're a clumsy butcher, a participant in a savage spectacle gone wrong, and suddenly the most hated man in a town that already held you in rock-bottom esteem. These are the moments that truly scour your soul, leaving scars far deeper than any physical injury. It's not just a bad day at work, it's a descent into a personal hell, played out for a jeering audience. As you spend your days dealing out death in its various gruesome forms, the thought of your own demise must be a frequent unwelcome visitor. How does a medieval executioner typically clock out for the last time? It's highly unlikely to be peacefully in your sleep, surrounded by loving family. What family? And remembered fondly for your charitable works. No, your end is probably as grim and undignified as the lives you've taken. Perhaps a workplace accident, a slip of the axe during a struggle, a tumble from a rickety scaffold, or a misjudged fire at a burning that gets a little too enthusiastic. Or maybe it's mob justice, one botched execution too many, or a shift in political winds that sees you declared an enemy of the people, and the crowd finally gets its chance to enact its long-simmering vengeance with stones and cudgels. Illness is another strong contender, some festering infection picked up from a corpse, or a lung-rotting disease contracted in your squalid, damp hovel. The irony wouldn't be lost on you, even in your final delirious moments. You, the purveyor of final exits, facing your own unceremonious end, with no one to offer a swift service or ensure your remains aren't just tossed into an unmarked pit. Your retirement plan is basically hoping you keel over quickly and don't inconvenience anyone too much on your way out. It's the ultimate cosmic joke, and you're the punchline. So, you've somehow managed to survive this far into your illustrious career, a grim testament more to sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness and a constitution surprisingly resistant to lethal pathogens than to any particular skill or divine favor. You're old now, by miserable medieval standards anyway, which probably means you're somewhere north of 35 and feeling every single one of those grueling, soul-crushing years in your aching bones and weary spirit. What are your prospects for a quiet retirement? A cozy little cottage by the sea, perhaps, where you can spend your golden years whittling driftwood, tending a small herb garden, and reflecting on a life. Well, a life lived anyway. Don't make me snort my lukewarm ale. There's no medieval 401k for state-sanctioned killers. There's no engraved gold watch, unless it's one you pried from a cold, dead wrist. No awkward farewell banquet featuring stale bread and watered-down wine, unless it's your own execution, in which case the menu is probably fear and regret. No pension plan that allows you to gracefully fade into obscurity, perhaps taking up competitive medieval checkers. Your retirement plan, if you can even call it that without laughing hysterically until you cough up a lung, usually involves one of a few equally grim scenarios. You either die on the job, a messy, undignified end during a botched execution, or at the sharpened end of a vengeful relative's pitchfork. You finally succumb to one of the myriad delightful diseases that have been playing a particularly aggressive game of tag with your abused immune system for decades. Or you simply become too old, too infirm, too shaky of hand and dim of eye to accurately swing an axe or tie a proper, non-slip noose. And what happens then, when your useful days are over? You're cast aside like a broken, blood-stained tool, left to beg on the streets where you once inspired terror, or starve quietly, in your hovel, your only legacy, the countless ghosts that populate your waking nightmares and the collective, enduring revulsion of everyone you've ever known. It's the ultimate dead-end job, because the end is almost invariably unpleasant, and there are absolutely no benefits other than, perhaps, the cessation of your professional duties, which in your case is a pretty low bar for perks. Your golden years are looking decidedly rusty, probably infectious, and definitely stained with something suspicious. Beyond your routine schedule of beheadings, hangings, and brandings, there are the special occasions, those delightful times when your workload suddenly spikes due to some unforeseen societal unpleasantness. A failed peasant rebellion? Congratulations, you've got a bulk order of hangings to get through, possibly with overtime that no one will pay you for. A new religious crusade against some unfortunate group deemed heretical? Get ready to barbecue. People for God, a task that requires a surprising amount of wood and a complete lack of a sense of smell. Sometimes, the authorities decide an exemplary punishment is in order. Something so spectacularly gruesome it will terrify the populace into obedience for at least a fortnight. This is where your creativity and cruelty, a skill you never asked to develop, is truly put to the test. Drawing and quartering, breaking on the wheel, or perhaps some inventive combination of tortures that would make a demon take notes. These aren't just busy periods, they're descents into a maelstrom of state-sanctioned slaughter, where you're working day and night, fueled by stale bread and the screams of the dying. Your town square becomes an abattoir, and you're the head butcher. Forget surge pricing. On your medieval Uber, you're just expected to handle the increased demand with your usual stoic misery, while the stench of death and fear clings to you like a second skin. These are the times you truly earn your title as the local nightmare inducer-in-chief. If this delightful profession is hereditary in your charming locale, or if the powers that be decide you're getting a bit long in the tooth and need an assistant, you get the unique joy of taking on an apprentice. Imagine the heartwarming scenes. No, son. You hold the disemboweling knife this way for a cleaner. Well, cleaner is relative, isn't it? You get to pass on your cursed knowledge, your catalog of horrors, your techniques for severing a head with minimal or maximal, depending on the order, fuss. You see your own youthful despair and terror mirrored in their wide, horrified eyes as they witness their first execution up close, the way their hands shake as they try to handle the heavy, blood-stained tools. You become a mentor in misery, a guide through the gruesome landscape of your profession. Are you dooming another soul to this life of ostracism and psychological torment? Absolutely. But hey, orders are orders, and someone has to do it when you're finally too broken to continue. It's the medieval equivalent of a really terrible internship program, where the main skill acquired is the ability to suppress your gag reflex and ignore the screaming in your own head. You're not just teaching a trade, you're actively cultivating another generation of societal outcasts. Yay, progress. Over the years, you've become a silent, unwilling repository of your town's darkest secrets. You've heard the desperate, last-minute confessions whispered on the scaffold, the names of accomplices blurted out under torture, the defiant curses against powerful figures. You've seen the fear in the eyes of supposedly untouchable nobles as they meet their end, the quiet dignity of some, the blubbering terror of others. You know who really stole the church relics, who poisoned old Baron von Grumbles, which merchant is cheating on his taxes, and his wife. This knowledge is a heavy, dangerous burden. It doesn't give you power. It just makes you a liability. If the wrong people suspect what you know, or what you might know, your already precarious existence becomes even more threatened. You're a walking, talking archive of inconvenient truths, a human Pandora's box that certain influential individuals would rather see permanently closed, preferably with 6 feet of dirt. Your silence is bought not with gold, but with the implicit understanding that if you ever start talking, your own execution will be swift, certain, and probably exceptionally unpleasant. You're less a keeper of secrets and more a hostage to them, trapped by the grim theater you've been forced to witness. When your official, pitifully small income isn't enough to keep the wolves, both literal and metaphorical, from your door, You might be forced to dabble in an even more macabre side hustle, the thriving medieval market for bits of executed criminals. Yes, you heard that right. In a world riddled with superstition and desperate for cures, certain parts of the condemned were believed to hold magical or medicinal properties. A hangman's rope could supposedly cure headaches or bring good luck at gambling. The touch of a hanged man's hand was thought to cure warts and tumors. Your medieval Etsy shop would be booming with that one. Genuine felon-fondled wart removal service. Fat rendered from a human corpse could be used in ointments for various ailments. Finger bones might be sold as amulets. So there you are, not just an executioner and torturer, but also a reluctant butcher and purveyor of human remains. You're haggling over the price of a tibia with some desperate peasant, or discreetly selling a lucky knucklebone to a shifty-looking gambler. This isn't just morally reprehensible, it's a whole new level of grim, turning your place of work into a grotesque charcuterie of despair. You're literally profiting from the dismemberment you've carried out. A gruesome recycling program where the end product is supposed to be hope, but usually just ends up being disappointment and a lingering bad smell. Your brand has now expanded to include artisanal remains and curiosities, sourced fresh from the gallows. The final curtain is twitching on the grand, gruesome stage of your life. No applause waits, just the cold, indifferent silence of your impending, unlamented obsolescence. Your body, once a reluctant but brutally efficient instrument of state-sanctioned brutality, now actively, almost gleefully, betrays you in new and increasingly humiliating ways. That persistent tremor in your hands? It's no longer just a fleeting symptom of fear or last night's particularly vicious cheap ale. It's the steady, mocking beat of approaching decrepitude, making each swing of the axe a terrifying gamble, arguably more so for your client than for you at this stage, though your own neck is also metaphorically on the line if you mess up too spectacularly. Your eyesight, once sharp enough to read the subtlest flicker of fear in a condemned man's eyes from 20 paces, now reduces the vibrant, stinking medieval world to a blurry, myopic mess, turning faces into indistinct smudges of pink and brown and the execution block into a vague, ominous shape you sincerely hope you're still aiming for. Your hearing, once attuned to every muttered curse and whispered plea, is now a muffled, confusing landscape of distorted sounds, the jeers of the crowd and the pompous pronouncements of the magistrate blending into a dull, meaningless roar, like listening to the world through a thick, damp blanket. Even your once overburdened sense of smell, formerly a reliable purveyor of medieval horrors from unwashed bodies to burning flesh, is mercifully fading, perhaps as a final, desperate act of self-preservation by your overwhelmed brain. Each grim task is now a monumental physical effort, each public appearance a fresh, cringing humiliation as you stumble, fumble, and visibly struggle, a pathetic, wheezing shadow of the terrifying, implacable figure you once were. You're not just old. You're a walking, talking workplace safety hazard in a profession that already had a pretty cavalier, if not outright contemptuous, attitude towards such trivial modern notions. The cold dread of catastrophic failure, of causing even more prolonged, unimaginable agony through your own encroaching physical decay, is now your constant, unwelcome companion, even more persistent and irritating than the lice. The psychological toll, always a heavy, soul-crushing counterweight to your grim duties, has now reached its devastating crescendo. Your waking hours are no longer merely punctuated by unpleasant memories. They are a bewildering, terrifying torment of intrusive thoughts and vivid, waking nightmares that ambush you without warning, overlaying the grim present with the even grimmer, blood-soaked past. The faces of those you've dispatched swim constantly before your failing eyes, not just in dreams, but superimposed onto the peeling walls of your hovel, reflected in puddles of fetid water, even shimmering in the weak broth you try to stomach. Their last gasps, their unheard pleas for mercy, their silent, accusing stares, all echo relentlessly in your ears, a cacophony louder and more persistent than the din of the real world. Sleep, once a brief, troubled respite, now offers no escape at all. Only a deeper, more terrifying descent into a chaotic nightmare realm populated by contorted bodies, vengeful specters wielding your own tools against you, and the ever-present, cloying smell of blood, fear, and burning flesh. You find yourself muttering incoherently to ghosts only you can see, arguing with phantoms from decades past, sometimes even reenacting long-forgotten tortures in the deepening solitude of your squalid, crumbling hovel. The already thin line between your harsh reality and the horrors of your imagination has become so blurred, so utterly porous, that you often don't know where, or, more terrifyingly, when you are. You are living more intimately and constantly with the legion of the dead you created than with the few living souls who still occasionally cross your path, usually only to mock your decay or pointedly ignore your existence. Your mind, once a reluctant but orderly cataloger of official horrors, is now a collapsing, ransacked archive, its gruesome contents spilling out in a terrifying, incoherent flood of pure, undiluted madness. You are a haunted house in decaying, human form. Each creak of your aging bones is a ghostly footstep in an empty corridor, each wheezing, rattling breath a spectral sigh from a tormented spirit. Your medieval sanity has officially checked out, packed its bags, and left no forwarding address, leaving only a quivering, terrified wreck behind. Then comes the inevitable day of your final, ignominious performance. It might not even be a particularly challenging assignment by the standards of your brutal heyday, perhaps a relatively minor affair, like a petty thief to be publicly whipped, or a minor local dissident to be confined to the pillory for a few hours of ritual humiliation. But for you, in your advanced state of physical and mental decay, it's a Herculean, almost insurmountable task. You stumble towards the town square, your tattered executioner's hood askew, revealing more of your ravaged face than you'd prefer. Your hands, those once steady instruments of death, now shake so violently from age and infirmity that you can barely grip the handle of the whip or manage the heavy wooden collar of the pillory. The crowd, always a barometer of cruelty, senses your utter decrepitude with predatory glee. Their jeers are louder, more pointed, their contempt thicker and more palpable than ever before. You try to go through the motions, to summon some vestige of your former terrifying presence, but your strength utterly fails you. The whip strokes, if you can even connect, are feeble, pathetic, barely raising welts, eliciting more laughter than screams. You can't even lift the pillory beam properly, fumbling with the fastenings like a confused child. The presiding magistrate, his face a mask of disgusted impatience and public embarrassment, eventually signals curtly to the town guards. This is it. Your last professional act is not one of terrifying efficiency, not a grim display of unwavering justice, but one of pitiful, protracted, public failure. There's no dramatic final execution to mark your exit, no blaze of terrible, awe-inspiring glory. Just a whimpering, undignified fizzle as you're shouldered aside by younger, stronger hands, perhaps your own resentful apprentice, eager to step into your blood-stained shoes, or some other unfortunate soul newly press-ganged into service. You've become too broken, too demonstrably useless even for this most reviled and physically demanding of professions. Your long, terrible career doesn't end with a bang, but with the sad, pathetic sigh of a worn-out tool that has finally, irrevocably snapped and been discarded without a second thought, cast aside. That's your severance package from a grateful society. No thank you for your decades of dedicated, if deeply unpleasant and soul-destroying service. No small purse of coins to see you through your final, wretched days. No commendation for a job no one else wanted, but everyone insisted was necessary. Just nothing. You're simply pushed out of the way, a piece of human refuse to be unceremoniously swept into the gutter along with the animal dung, the rotting vegetables, and other assorted medieval detritus. The hovel you inhabited, as miserable and squalid as it was, is probably no longer yours, immediately requisitioned for the next poor soul unlucky enough to inherit your blood-stained mantle and your collection of rusty, ominous tools. Suddenly, you are utterly adrift, stripped even of the grim, terrifying identity that has defined your entire adult life. You are no longer the executioner, the fearsome embodiment of swift and brutal justice. You are just an old, broken, forgotten man, reeking of sickness, poverty, and the kind of deep-seated despair that even cheap ale can no longer touch. You possess no skills beyond those that make people recoil in visceral horror or cross themselves fervently. The very society that implicitly, and sometimes explicitly, relied on your brutal services to maintain its precarious version of order now demonstrates its ultimate chilling indifference to your fate. You might wander the streets for a time, a ragged specter of your former self, largely invisible to most, an object of casual scorn or morbid fleeting curiosity to the few who even bother to notice your pathetic existence. The intricate, unspoken web of fear and grudging necessity that once connected you, however unpleasantly, to the community, has been decisively severed, leaving you floating in a cold, dark void of absolute, crushing isolation. You are a non-entity, a ghost before your time, your only remaining purpose to serve as a grim warning to disobedient children, or perhaps the subject for a particularly depressing and off-key folk song. Your final days are a terrifyingly immersive masterclass in advanced medieval misery, the grim culmination of a life spent dealing out pain and suffering, now visited back upon your own wretched self with cold, impartial, almost artistic interest. Alone, utterly impoverished, and racked with a symphony of untreated diseases, you eventually find your final, squalid shelter in some forgotten, refuse-strewn alleyway, huddled against the cold, damp stone of a crumbling wall, wrapped in rags, that offer virtually no comfort against the biting wind and gnawing chill. Hunger is a constant, debilitating, gnawing companion. Your weak, raspy pleas for scraps of food, met mostly with curses, kicks, or the hurried footsteps of townsfolk, averting their gaze from your repellent, fallen form. The ghosts of your past, those constant companions of your later years, are more vivid and terrifyingly real than ever now. Their tormented faces. So, you thought being an executioner was the bottom of the medieval barrel? Oh, you sweet, optimistic fool. Just when you believed your historical self-torture tour couldn't get any more creatively awful, your loving, God-fearing family, or perhaps just some local authorities thoroughly fed up with your anachronistic sarcasm and tendency to question why leeching is considered peak medical science, decided you needed a spiritual retreat. That's what they called it. A chance to commune with the Almighty and reflect on your many, many shortcomings. You suspect it was more about them communing with the idea of you being someone else's problem, preferably someone far, far away, with very high walls and a strict no-visitors policy. And thus, you find yourself on a rickety cart, bouncing over a godforsaken track that laughingly calls itself a road, heading towards a place whispered about in hushed, fearful tones. Blackwood Abbey, home of the Shadow Priory. The name alone doesn't exactly scream fun-filled spiritual getaway with optional spa treatments, does it? It sounds more like the kind of place where joy goes to die, and hobbies include competitive brooding and advanced liturgical sighing. Your driver, a man whose face looks like a badly eroded gargoyle, and who hasn't uttered a word for the past 6 hours beyond the occasional grunt that could mean anything from nice weather to I enjoy the taste of human flesh, finally points a grimy finger towards a dark smudge on the horizon, nestled ominously amidst a tangle of ancient, gnarled trees that look like they've personally strangled every last ounce of happiness from the surrounding landscape. Blackwood, he croaks, and you swear the temperature drops a few degrees. Home sweet, horrifying home. As you draw closer, the Abbey looms out of the perpetual twilight that seems to cling to this accursed corner of the world, like cheap perfume on a particularly unfortunate badger. It's less a house of God and more a fortress of feudal gloom, all oppressive gray stone, narrow slit windows that look like suspicious narrowed eyes, and a bell tower that seems poised to toll not for prayer, but for your rapidly dwindling sanity. There are no welcoming lights, no cheerful monks tending a picturesque herb garden. Just silence, a heavy, brooding silence that feels like it could crush you. The air itself smells old. Not a pleasant antique shop old, but a damp, forgotten, slightly menacing old. Like the breath of a long-dead saint with questionable dental hygiene and even more questionable secrets. Your heart, already performing a nervous tap dance against your ribs, attempts a full-blown thrash metal drum solo. You consider making a run for it, but one look at the sheer drop on one side of the track and the impenetrable thorny forest on the other, not to mention Gargoyle Face McGee and his disturbingly large cudgel, convinces you that your immediate future involves significantly less running and significantly more supervised suffering. This isn't just a bad day. It's the ominous opening chapter of a horror story where you're the entirely expendable main character, the one who inexplicably decides to investigate the strange noise in the cellar armed only with a flickering candle and a deeply misplaced sense of curiosity. You're unceremoniously dumped at a massive iron-studded oak door that looks like it hasn't been opened since the last ice age, or possibly just last Tuesday for another unwilling guest. Gargoyle Face bangs on it with what sounds suspiciously like a human femur, and after an eternity punctuated only by your increasingly frantic internal monologue about the merits of feigning sudden, explosive plague symptoms, a small grille slides open. A pair of eyes, cold and ancient as glaciers, peer out, scrutinizing you with the kind of detached interest a particularly jaded entomologist might reserve for a common, uninteresting beetle. Papers are exchanged, your spiritual death warrant presumably, and with a groan that seems to echo from the very bowels of the earth, the massive door creaks open, revealing not a warmly lit, welcoming hallway, but a cavernous, shadowy void that swallows the meager daylight whole. Welcome to Blackwood Abbey. Your lifetime subscription to Misery Monastic Style has just been activated, and the cancellation policy is, shall we say, rather final. You're guided, or perhaps more accurately, prodded, down a series of stone corridors colder than your ex's heart, the only sound the echoing slap of your worn-out shoes, and the rustle of your guide's voluminous, unnervingly dark robes. You pass by heavy closed doors from behind which you hear nothing. Absolutely nothing. Which is somehow more terrifying than if you'd heard screams or maniacal laughter. It's the silence of absolute obedience, or perhaps the silence of everyone being too terrified to even breathe too loudly. Eventually, you're brought before the prior. Or is it an abbot? You're a bit fuzzy on the ecclesiastical hierarchy, but whatever his title, he's clearly the big cheese of this particular gloomy fondue set. He's ancient, with skin like stretched parchment pulled taut over a skull, and eyes that seem to pierce right through your carefully constructed facade of slightly bewildered but ultimately harmless traveler, to the terrified modern sensibilities-having individual cowering within. His voice, when he finally speaks, is dry and rustling, like dead leaves skittering across a tombstone. He drones on about rules, piety, obedience, the sacred silence, and the importance of rooting out worldly sin, all while looking at you as if you're a particularly flamboyant manifestation of sin itself, probably just for blinking too often, or not having enough visible suffering etched onto your face yet. Your welcome package consists of a list of prohibitions longer than your arm, a single threadbare blanket that looks like it's already been used to smother several small hopes and dreams, and a stare that promises eternal damnation if you Even think about asking for the Wi-Fi password. You're then escorted to your new cell. The term is alarmingly accurate. It's a small stone-walled room, roughly the size of a generous coffin, furnished with a hard wooden slab that laughingly calls itself a bed, a single flickering tallow candle that throws more shadows than light, and a bucket in the corner for, well, you can guess. The overwhelming impression is one of cold, damp, and the lingering psychic residue of centuries of profound unhappiness. You wouldn't be surprised if the previous occupant had gnawed their way through the stone wall with their teeth just to escape, or at least to get a slightly better view of the overwhelmingly gray misery outside. The daily routine, you soon discover, is a medieval boot camp for the soul, designed to crush your spirit with the relentless efficiency of a particularly sadistic personal trainer. Your day begins before dawn, summoned by a bell that sounds less like a call to prayer and more like a fire alarm in the ninth circle of hell. You stumble out of your frigid cell, already sleep-deprived and questioning every life choice that led you here, into the icy darkness for the first of what seems like an endless series of religious services. The services themselves are long, droning affairs, conducted entirely in Latin, which you don't speak, so you spend most of your time trying to look piously contemplative, while actually wondering if you could convincingly fake a seizure to get out of it, or perhaps just calculating how many centuries it would take for your fingernails to grow long enough to tunnel your way to freedom. Between prayers, there are chores. Grueling, mind-numbing, back-breaking chores. Scrubbing stone floors with what feels like your own toothbrush. Tending a lifeless patch of frozen ground they call a garden. Copying incomprehensible manuscripts in a scriptorium so cold your ink freezes. Or mucking out something that smells suspiciously like the unholy offspring of a diseased badger and a pile of forgotten sins. Meals are meager, silent, and mostly consist of some kind of unidentifiable gray slop that tastes faintly of despair and old socks. Conversation is forbidden. Laughter is a distant, almost mythical concept. Your only companions are the other. Monks. Silent, shadowy figures with faces like gravestones and eyes that never quite meet yours. As if looking at you for too long might be contagious. You try to make eye contact once, offer a tentative, friendly nod to a brother monk whose main job seems to be staring intently at a wall, and he flinches as if you just offered him a live scorpion. Clearly, making new friends is not high on the Abbey's list of approved activities. As the days, or rather, the endlessly repeating cycles of misery, blur into one another, you start to notice things. Little things, at first. The way certain corridors are always locked, even to most of the monks. The hushed, furtive whispers that cease abruptly whenever you approach. The way some of the older monks seem to carry a burden of fear that goes beyond simple piety or the dread of eternal damnation. It's a more immediate, earthly terror. There are sounds at night too. Faint, unsettling sounds that drift through the thick stone walls. Sounds that don't quite belong in a place of worship. Sometimes it's a low, mournful chanting, different from the daily liturgy, coming from a direction you can't quite pinpoint. Other times, it's a scraping, dragging noise from deep beneath the abbey, as if something heavy is being moved or buried. You also notice the library, a vast, shadowy chamber filled with ancient, leather-bound tomes, many of them chained to the shelves. You're not supposed to go in there without supervision, but one afternoon, driven by a combination of soul-crushing, boredom, and a desperate need for something, anything, to distract you from the existential void that is your new life, you sneak in. Most of the books are what you'd expect. Dense theological treatises, lives of obscure saints who specialized in particularly inventive forms of self-torment. But then you find a section, hidden away in a dark alcove, where the books feel different. The leather bindings are darker, almost black, and some of them seem to pulse with a faint, unsettling warmth when you touch them. The script inside is spidery, unfamiliar, interspersed with disturbing, almost grotesque illustrations that make your stomach churn. You don't know what these books are, but a cold dread tells you they're not part of the standard monastic curriculum. This isn't just a place of boring prayer and hard labor. There's a current of something else running beneath the surface here. Something old, something secret, and something deeply, profoundly wrong. You are trapped, you are friendless, and you are beginning to suspect that the whispered secrets of Blackwood Abbey are far more sinister than you could have ever imagined. Your medieval spiritual retreat is rapidly turning into a one-way ticket to a very dark and uncomfortable destination, and the only thing you're communing with is a growing sense of abject terror. You're not just screwed, you're consecrated, signed, sealed, and delivered into a nightmare. Your brief, terrifying foray into the forbidden section of Blackwood Abbey's library has lit a small, flickering candle of morbid curiosity in the vast, echoing darkness of your otherwise soul-crushingly monotonous existence. It's a stupid, dangerous candle, the kind that in any sensible horror movie signals the imminent and gruesome demise of whoever is holding it. But frankly, at this point, anything is better than another endless afternoon spent trying to meditate on the virtues of humility, while your stomach audibly protests the theological implications of watery turnip stew. So, naturally, you go back. Several times. Under the guise of needing to consult theological texts for deeper spiritual understanding. A lie so blatant you're surprised the ancient prior doesn't immediately smite you with a bolt of holy indignation, or at least assign you to latrine duty for the next decade. You sneak back into that shadowy alcove. The strange, dark books draw you in, their very presence a silent, unsettling hum against the oppressive piety of the abbey. With trembling hands, you begin to decipher more of their contents. The script is archaic, a bastardized form of Latin, mixed with symbols you've never seen before, symbols that make your skin crawl and your teeth ache just looking at them. The illustrations are even worse, depicting bizarre rituals, celestial charts that seem to map unknown, nightmarish constellations, and figures that are disturbingly not quite human, engaged in acts that would make a hardened inquisitor blush and reach for his strongest holy water. You find repeated references to something called the Ordo Umbrarum Nigrarum, the Order of Black Shadows, if your rusty schoolboy Latin serves you right, and detailed, almost obsessive accounts of astronomical alignments, sacrificial offerings, thankfully vague on specifics, but your imagination, now thoroughly overstimulated, helpfully fills in the gory details, and methods for communing with that which lies beyond the veil. This isn't just heretical. This is next level, demon summoning, reality-bending stuff that makes your previous worries about stale bread and chilblains seem positively quaint. Your medieval monastic wellness retreat, it turns out, comes with a complementary side of existential dread and a potential subscription to eldritch horrors. You start to wonder if the Abbey's recruitment poster mentioned opportunities to liaise with entities from the void. Probably not. Armed with this terrifying new knowledge, or rather this new arsenal of reasons to whet your already uncomfortable straw palate, you start observing your fellow monks with a renewed, albeit deeply, fearful interest. Most of them still seem to be your garden variety, downtrodden, sleep-deprived religious drones, their faces etched with the same familiar blend of boredom and spiritual constipation. But a few stand out. There's Brother Malachi, the Abbey's librarian, a man so ancient and desiccated he looks like he might crumble into dust if you sneezed too hard in his vicinity. His eyes, however, are far from dusty. They are sharp, unnervingly intelligent, and seem to follow you with a knowing, almost predatory intensity, especially when you're anywhere near his precious forbidden books. Then there's Brother Thomas, a hulking brute of a man whose knuckles are permanently bruised and who seems to be in charge of discipline, which you suspect involves more than just stern lectures. He moves with a silent, menacing grace, and you've seen him leading small groups of select monks into the deeper, locked sections of the abbey late at night. none of whom look particularly thrilled about these nocturnal excursions. And, of course, there's the prior himself, whose dry, rustling voice now seems to carry an undercurrent of something far more sinister than simple piety. You begin to suspect there's an inner circle here, a core group privy to the true, shadowy purpose of Blackwood Abbey, while the rest of you are just spiritual cannon fodder, a medieval human shield of oblivious prayer. Their idea of team building probably involves ritual sacrifice and chanting in a language that makes dogs howl miles away. One evening, huddled in your freezing cell, trying to generate enough body heat to avoid becoming a permanent part of the Abbey's glacial decor, you hear it. Not the usual unsettling bumps and scrapes, but something more organized, more deliberate. It's that strange, low chanting again, but closer this time, seemingly emanating from the chapel, which should be locked and empty at this ungodly hour. Your survival instincts, which have been screaming at you to keep your head down and pretend to be a particularly devout turnip, are momentarily overridden by a surge of that same idiotic curiosity that will undoubtedly be the death of you. You creep out of your cell, your heart hammering a rhythm that would make a death metal drummer proud, and inch your way down the pitch-black corridor towards the chapel. The main doors are indeed locked, but you notice a faint sliver of flickering, a light escaping from beneath a small, rarely used side entrance, usually reserved for bringing in supplies of a more mundane, less soul-endangering nature. The door is ajar, just a crack. Peeking through, your blood runs colder than the stone floor beneath your bare feet. Inside, the chapel is illuminated not by holy candles, but by a strange, greenish, flickering light emanating from braziers you've never seen before. A small group of monks, robed and hooded in black rather than their usual drab brown, are gathered in a circle. You recognize Brother Malachi, Brother Thomas, and even the prior himself. They are chanting in that same guttural, disturbing language from the forbidden books, their voices weaving a complex, hypnotic, and deeply unsettling soundscape. In the center of the circle, on the altar, lies something. You can't quite make it out from your vantage point, but it's small, dark, and seems to writhe or pulse in the eerie green light. The air is thick with a strange, metallic, cloying odor that makes you want to gag. You don't know what unholy Tupperware party you've stumbled upon, but it's clear this isn't your standard Compline service. This is something else entirely. Something that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up and scream, "Run away, you utter moron!" The unexplained noises and events escalate. The scraping sounds from beneath the abbey become more frequent, sometimes accompanied by a dull, rhythmic thudding, as if a giant subterranean heart is slowly beating. Shadowy figures flit at the edges of your vision, disappearing when you try to look directly at them. Lights appear in the windows of supposedly abandoned sections of the priory late at night, only to vanish moments later. The atmosphere in the abbey grows heavier, more charged, like the air before a violent thunderstorm. Even the more oblivious monks seem on edge, their usual stoic misery now tinged with a palpable anxiety. You try to piece together fragments of the abbey's history. The few safer books in the library mention that Blackwood was founded on the site of a much older, pre-Christian temple, a place rumored to be a locus of ancient and untamable energies. You find faded carvings in the stonework of the older parts of the abbey, strange coiling symbols that echo those in the forbidden texts, half hidden behind newer, more conventional Christian iconography, as if the builders were trying to pave over a much darker foundation. One of the oldest monks, Brother Cuthbert, who spends most of his days lost in a senile daze, occasionally mutters about the old ones beneath the stones and the pact that must be honored, lest the shadows consume all. Most of the time, his ramblings are dismissed as the product of a failing mind. But now, his words send a fresh jolt of terror through you. It seems Blackwood Abbey isn't just a repository of dark knowledge. It's a lid, a very old and possibly very fragile lid, on something truly terrible. Your attempts to glean more information, or even just find a friendly face, are met with a wall of silence more impenetrable than the Abbey's stone ramparts. If you try to ask even the most innocuous question about the Abbey's history, or its more unusual customs, the monks either stare blankly through you as if you haven't spoken, or their eyes widen in what looks suspiciously like fear before they make a hasty excuse to be elsewhere, usually involving urgent, unspecified duties in the turnip patch or the scriptorium. The message is clear: do not ask questions. Your curiosity, however, is a hungry beast, and it's starting to get you noticed. Brother Malachi's gaze seems to linger on you longer during mealtimes, his thin lips sometimes curling into a smile that contains absolutely no warmth and a significant amount of, "I know what you've been reading, you little reprobate." Brother Thomas has taken to appearing silently behind you at inconvenient moments, his massive presence a constant, unspoken threat. You get the distinct impression that your medieval performance review is imminent, and it might involve an actual review of your vital organs by someone holding a very sharp, unholy instrument. The feeling of being trapped is no longer just a general sense of institutional oppression. It's rapidly escalating into the acute paranoia of a hunted animal. You're pretty sure your continued existence within these walls is now being measured in increasingly short units of time. One night, returning to your cell after a particularly grueling session of dish scrubbing with what you suspect was holy water mixed with gravel, you find something on your bed. It's a small, crudely carved wooden bird, similar to one you saw illustrated in one of the forbidden texts, next to a passage detailing omens and warnings. It wasn't there when you left. Someone has been in your cell. Someone knows you're snooping. And someone is sending you a message. A very, very clear message that your time for blissful ignorance is officially, terrifyingly over. That damned wooden bird. It sits on the rough stone ledge of your cell, a tiny, malevolent idol, radiating an almost palpable aura of, "We know what you're up to, you meddling little twit," and your subscription to breathing is about to be reviewed. Your initial reaction is, understandably, a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror that makes your internal organs attempt to swap places. You consider throwing it out the narrow slit of a window, but you suspect that would be like trying to return a cursed artifact to sender. It would probably just reappear on your pillow, possibly accompanied by a few tastefully arranged spiders. Sleep, already a precious and elusive commodity in this medieval misery factory, now completely abandoned Japangdon's you. Every creak of the ancient abbey, every rustle of wind, every distant cough from a neighboring cell sounds like Brother Malachi, sharpening his letter opener with homicidal intent, or Brother Thomas practicing his silent but deadly approach techniques. Your paranoia levels up from mildly concerned to convinced the pigeons are judging your life choices and reporting back to the prior. You try to feign utter, bovine ignorance, adopting an air of someone whose deepest thoughts revolve around the theological significance of particularly lumpy porridge. But it's hard to look pious when you're constantly checking over your shoulder and jumping at your own shadow, which, in the perpetually dim corridors of Blackwood, is a surprisingly frequent occurrence. Your attempts at looking like a model novice are probably about as convincing as a wolf trying to sell vegan sausages at a sheep convention. The surveillance, which was previously a subtle, unnerving undercurrent, now ramps up to an almost comical degree of obviousness if it weren't so terrifying. Brother Malachi, the skeletal librarian with eyes like chips of obsidian, seems to have developed an uncanny ability to materialize silently whenever you're near any book that isn't a collection of deeply uninspiring psalms. He'll just appear, a silent, looming specter of disapproval, sometimes offering helpful suggestions for your spiritual reading, which invariably involve texts on the dire consequences of idle curiosity and the eternal damnation awaiting those who pry into matters best left undisturbed. His breath smells like dust and forgotten sins, and his smile, when he occasionally deploys it, is a rictus of pure, unadulterated menace. Brother Thomas, the Abbey's resident enforcer and part-time troll impersonator, has taken to accompanying you on your chores, his massive silent presence about as comforting as a live alligator in your chamber pot. He doesn't speak, he just watches, his gaze heavy and possessive, making you acutely aware of every nervous twitch, every bead of sweat. The prior himself even summons you for a private chat in his forbiddingly austere study. He offers you a cup of something that looks and smells suspiciously like watered-down despair, and then proceeds to deliver a long, rambling monologue about the sacred duties of the priory, the importance of unwavering obedience, and the unfortunate accidents that sometimes befell monks who allowed their minds to wander down unwholesome paths. It's all very polite, very pastoral, but the underlying message is as clear as a freshly polished executioner's axe. Stop snooping, or your next spiritual retreat will be 6 feet under the abbey's already overcrowded graveyard. You leave his study with your knees knocking a nervous rhythm and the distinct feeling that your Employee of the Month award is probably going to be a one-way ticket to the Undercroft. Blackwood Abbey, come for the salvation. Stay because you're now on a very short, very scary leash. One moonless, storm-lashed night, as you lie shivering in your cell, listening to the wind howl like a banshee with a particularly sore throat, you witness something that elevates your fear from a manageable simmer to a full-blown, terror-fueled boil. You're jolted from a fitful doze by a sound unlike any you've heard before. A low, guttural chanting. Yes, but interwoven with something else. A high-pitched, ululating cry that is definitely not human and sounds like it's being produced by something in immense pain, or perhaps immense unholy ecstasy. It seems to be coming from the old, disused tower at the far end of the abbey. A place so dilapidated and structurally unsound that even the rats seem to avoid it. Driven by that same self-destructive urge that makes people poke sticks at sleeping. Dragons, you creep towards it. The storm provides excellent cover for your movements. You find a crumbling section of wall that offers a narrow, obstructed view into the tower's base. What you see makes your stomach try to claw its way up your throat. In a chamber lit by a single sputtering brazier that casts writhing, monstrous shadows, several black-robed figures, the inner circle, no doubt, are gathered around a crudely drawn circle on the floor, etched with those same disturbing symbols from the forbidden books. The air shimmers and warps inside the circle, as if a tremendous heat or an invisible force is distorting reality itself. And for a horrifying, sanity-shredding instant, you see it. A shape, a presence, coalescing within the shimmering distortion. A glimpse of something vast, ancient, and utterly inimical to everything you understand about the world. It's a chaotic riot of impossible angles, unnameable colors, and a suggestion of countless, lidless eyes that seem to stare directly into your soul, promising an eternity of madness. The ululating cry intensifies, and then, just as quickly as it appeared, the presence is gone. The air snaps back to normal, and the figures slump as if exhausted. You don't know what you just saw. A demon, a god from a forgotten age, a particularly nasty bit of undigested turnip manifesting as a psychic projection. But you know it wasn't good. You scramble back to your cell, your mind reeling, the image of those impossible eyes burned into your retinas. The Abbey's HR department clearly had a very direct approach to liaising with external stakeholders. Your desperate attempts to find out what happened to others who might have been too curious are depressingly fruitful. You discover, tucked away behind a loose stone in the oldest part of the crypt, a place you were accidentally cleaning with Brother Thomas breathing down your neck, a small, decaying, leather-bound journal. Its pages are filled with frantic, spidery script, detailing the observations of a monk from decades past, a Brother Alaric, who had also stumbled upon the priory's darker secrets. His entries chart a descent from horrified curiosity to outright terror, ending abruptly mid-sentence with a blot of what looks suspiciously like dried blood. There's no record of a Brother Alaric in the Abbey's official chronicles. It's as if he never existed. Later, while tending the Abbey's neglected graveyard, another delightful chore, especially in the rain, you notice several unmarked graves in a far, overgrown corner, stones simply jutting from the earth with no names, no dates. When you, casually, or as casually as a terrified wreck can manage, ask one of the older, more senile monks about them, he just shudders, makes a warning sign, and mutters something about those who saw too much, and the silence that claims them. The Abbey's policy on information leaks, it seems, is less cease and desist, and more cease to exist. Their definition of an internal audit probably involves a lot more screaming and significantly fewer spreadsheets than yours ever did. The noose is definitely tightening. Your earlier, almost playful snooping has transformed into a frantic, desperate scramble for understanding, or at least survival. You try to formulate a plan for escape, something involving scaling the walls at night, or perhaps impersonating a sack of particularly unappetizing turnips being delivered out. But the walls are impossibly high and patrolled by figures who move with an unnatural silence, and your turnip impersonation skills are, frankly, abysmal. Every avenue seems blocked, every potential ally too terrified or too deeply implicated to help. You are well and truly on your own, a tiny, insignificant speck of modern rationality, trapped in a medieval machine of ancient, unknowable horror. You realize with a sickening lurch that you're no longer just an unwilling guest. You're a problem, a loose end, and Blackwood Abbey has a very thorough, very permanent way of dealing with loose ends. The whispers are no longer just in the corridors. They're in your head, the secrets of the Shadow Priory, a poisonous knowledge that is slowly, inexorably dragging you down into its dark, unfathomable depths. You've seen too much, learned too much. The question is no longer if they'll come for you, but when. And what exactly they plan to do with you once your continued existence becomes more inconvenient than your potential as another silent, preying drone. The discovery of the carved bird, followed by your terrifying glimpse into whatever unholy rave was happening in the old tower, has officially upgraded your status from unwillingly pious to actively trying not to become a medieval missing person statistic. You spend your days attempting to look as inconspicuous as a particularly dull cobblestone, mastering the art of staring vacantly into the middle distance while your brain screams internally like a banshee trapped in a particularly small biscuit tin. Your nights are a masterclass in feigned sleep, every nerve ending fizzing with a cocktail of terror and an unhealthy amount of adrenaline, waiting for the telltale creak of your cell door that signals your invitation to a late-night chat, from which you suspect you won't be returning, at least not in one easily identifiable piece. You even try to dispose of Brother Alaric's journal, that incriminating little booklet of doom, by attempting to eat it page by page. But medieval parchment, it turns out, is surprisingly resilient and tastes remarkably like despair-infused cardboard. You manage about half a page lamenting the shadows that whisper in the deep places, before nearly choking, and decide that internalizing the evidence, while metaphorically apt, is not a practical long-term strategy. Your best bet, you figure, is to play dumb, radiate an aura of someone whose most complex thought is whether a turnip can achieve enlightenment, and pray to any deity, orthodox or otherwise, that might be listening and isn't currently on Blackwood Abbey's speed dial. But the Priory, it seems, has other plans for your spiritual development. One afternoon, during the mandatory contemplative labor session, which today involves you shifting a massive pile of suspiciously stained rocks from one side of a muddy courtyard to the other for no discernible reason, a task that feels like a medieval Sisyphean fitness challenge. A junior monk, a nervous, twitchy lad named Brother Michael, whom you've barely interacted with, sidles up to you. He avoids eye contact, his voice a barely audible whisper. "Brother," he mutters, his gaze fixed firmly on a particularly unholy-looking beetle scuttling past your foot. "There are things you should know, things others have seen. Meet me in the old scriptorium after Compline. There's a loose floorboard behind the third lectern. Be cautious." And then he's gone, scurrying away like a frightened mouse who's just remembered a pressing engagement with a piece of cheese located very far from you. Your internal alarm bells, already clanging with the enthusiasm of a one-man band on amphetamines, go into overdrive. This is it. The classic horror movie setup. The cryptic message, the clandestine meeting, the promise of answers that will almost certainly lead to your immediate and messy demise. Every instinct, honed by years of, admittedly anachronistic, modern cynicism, and a healthy appreciation for not being ritually disemboweled, screams, "Trap! Abort! Run for the hills! And don't look back!" But then you remember the hills are probably full of wolves, or worse, more monks, and the abbey walls are higher than your chances of ever seeing a flushing toilet again. Besides, a tiny, treacherous part of you, the part that hasn't yet been completely bludgeoned into submission by fear and turnip stew, actually wants to know, what fresh hell could possibly top what you've already witnessed? Oh, you sweet, naive, summer child. So, after Compline, as the last mournful notes of the chant fade into the oppressive silence of the abbey night, you make your way to the old scriptorium. The place is a labyrinth of shadows and dust, smelling faintly of decaying parchment, and the ghosts of long-dead scribes who probably went mad trying to illuminate manuscripts by the light of a single sputtering candle. You find the third lectern, your heart doing a passable imitation of a trapped bird against your ribs. With trembling fingers, you feel around behind it. Sure enough, a floorboard is loose. You pry it up, expecting... what? More forbidden texts? A map to the Abbey's secret stash of non-gray food? Instead, your fingers brush against something cold and metallic. A ring. And then, before you can even register this new, confusing clue, the trap, as you so brilliantly foresaw, springs with all the subtlety of a battering ram. The door to the scriptorium, which you'd carefully left ajar, slams shut with a resounding, final-sounding thud. Torches flare to life around the room, held by a welcoming committee that includes none other than Brother Malachi, looking like a smug, skeletal vulture who's just spotted a particularly juicy piece of roadkill, and Brother Thomas, whose expression, if it can even be called that, is a perfect study in brutal indifference. And stepping out from the deepest shadows, his eyes gleaming with a cold reptilian amusement, is the prior himself. "Brother," he says, his voice that familiar dry rustle, now laced with something akin to triumph. "We were beginning to wonder when your scholarly pursuits would lead you here. It seems Brother Michael's bait was most effective. Your stomach plummets. Brother Michael, the nervous informant, was one of them all along. You've been played like a cheap lute. You've been upgraded from person of mildly suspicious interest to keynote speaker at the upcoming sacrificial ceremony. Or at least, that's what your overactive imagination is screaming. Curiosity," the prior continues, circling you slowly like a predator sizing up its cornered prey, his movements surprisingly agile for someone who looks like he should be carbon-dated, "is a dangerous flaw, brother, especially in a place such as Blackwood, a place with responsibilities." He gestures vaguely towards the ring you're still clutching like a drowning man clinging to a particularly unhelpful piece of driftwood. "This abbey, this Ordo Umbrarum Nigrarum, has stood guard for centuries. We are the watchers on the threshold, the keepers of the gate, the ones who tend the delicate balance between this world and that which yearns to enter it." His eyes gleam with a fanatic light. "That which you glimpsed in the tower? A mere echo, a whisper. We negotiate with whispers, brother, so that the world outside does not have to contend with the scream." He smiles, a truly terrifying sight that involves far too many teeth for a man of his advanced years. "Some called us heretics, fools. But we understand the true nature of power, the ancient compacts that bind the stones of this world together. And sometimes," his voice drops to a conspiratorial whisper, "sacrifices are necessary to maintain that balance. Small prices to pay for the continued blissful ignorance of the masses." He pauses, letting his words hang in the cold, dusty air. You with your prying and your anachronistic discomfort. You threaten that balance. You have seen too much, understood too little, and asked far too many inconvenient questions. This, you realize with a fresh wave of cold dread, is not the "we're going to give you a stern talking to and extra latrine duty" kind of confrontation. This is the "your continued existence is a profound administrative inconvenience we are about to rectify" kind of confrontation. Turns out, Blackwood Abbey's employee retention program involves a lot of chains and very little paperwork. Your attempts at stammering out some kind of denial, some desperate plea of "it's all a big misunderstanding, I was just looking for the recipe for that surprisingly edible Lenten bread," die in your throat as Brother Thomas steps forward, his massive hands reaching for you. There's no struggle, not really. You're about as capable of resisting him as a wet kitten is of fending off a hungry wolf. You are dragged, not gently, from the scriptorium, down a series of increasingly narrow, damp, and foul-smelling stone staircases that seem to spiral endlessly into the bowels of the earth, far beneath the abbey proper. The air grows colder, heavier, thick with the scent of mildew, decay, and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. This is clearly not the wing where they keep the guest soaps and the complimentary fruit baskets. You are brought to a vast, subterranean chamber, its rough-hewn walls slick with moisture, and covered in more of those disturbing, coiling symbols you saw in the forbidden books, and carved into the older stones of the abbey. Torches set in rusty, sconces cast flickering, dancing shadows, revealing alcoves containing things, rusted implements whose purpose you dare not guess, chains bolted to the walls, and dark stains on the floor that your mind desperately tries to convince you are just spilled wine. Really old, really dark wine. In the center of the chamber is a massive stone slab, disturbingly altar-like, covered in more carvings and channels that look suspiciously like they're designed to direct fluids. This, you realize with a final, crushing wave of despair, is where the abbey does its real work. This is the heart of the Shadow Priory, and you are now its guest of honor, a position that comes with absolutely no perks and a very high probability of a dramatically shortened lifespan. The last vestiges of hope, already tattered and worn thin, finally unravel completely. You are in their domain now, a place where prayer and piety are just a thin veneer over something ancient, terrible, and utterly indifferent to your suffering. Your anachronistic wit and modern sensibilities are useless here. You are well and truly, comprehensively, apocalyptically screwed. Your grand tour of Blackwood Abbey's less advertised amenities continues, culminating in what you can only describe as their executive suite of suffering, nestled deep in the cold, damp armpit of the earth beneath the priory. After your enlightening chat with the prior in the scriptorium, which felt less like a scholarly discussion and more like a very polite mafia interrogation, where they subtly imply your kneecaps are about to experience early retirement, Brother Thomas, with his usual charming blend of brute force and silent disapproval, frog marches you to your new, upgraded accommodations. If your previous cell was a minimalist's nightmare, this new one is a full-blown gothic horror show. It's less a room and more a carved-out hole in the ancient weeping stone, possibly excavated by giant, despair-addicted badgers. The door is a solid slab of iron-banded oak, complete with a reassuringly final-sounding deadbolt and a tiny grill, through which, presumably, your daily ration of misery-infused gruel will be unceremoniously shoved. The air is thick, heavy, and carries a delightful potpourri of scents. Mildew, ancient dust, rodent droppings, something vaguely sulfurous, and an underlying, deeply unsettling metallic tang that reminds you uncomfortably of old blood, and even older secrets. Your only companions are the dripping water that forms a steady, maddening rhythm against the stone, the rustling of unseen, many-legged things in the impenetrable darkness, and the distant, echoing sounds of something. Sometimes it's chanting, distorted and alien-sounding, vibrating up through the very floor. Other times it's a faint, rhythmic scraping, or a low, resonant hum that seems to thrum in your bones, making your teeth ache and your sanity question its life choices. You've officially been downgraded from unwilling guest with limited library privileges to full-time resident of the oubliette, pending further, undoubtedly gruesome developments. Your medieval TripAdvisor review for this place would be a single, emphatic scream emoji. Over what you guess are days, though time in this lightless, soul-crushing pit has become a rather fluid and unreliable concept, your captors occasionally grace you with their presence. It's usually Brother Malachi, his skeletal face illuminated by a single flickering candle, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing mixture of academic curiosity and outright malice. He seems to enjoy your predicament, treating you less like a prisoner and more like a particularly interesting specimen in his ongoing study of the effects of prolonged terror and sensory deprivation on the heretical mind. He taunts you with fragments of information, little breadcrumbs of cosmic horror designed to shatter what remains of your composure. The prior spoke of balance, of the gate, he'd hiss, his voice like dry leaves skittering across a forgotten tomb. But balance is such a delicate thing, isn't it? Easily disturbed. That which slumbers beyond the threshold, that which we have kept slumbering for generations, it does not wish to be balanced. It wishes to be free. He'd then describe, in chillingly abstract yet terrifyingly suggestive terms, the true nature of the entity, or entities, that Blackwood Abbey was built to contain, or perhaps to appease. It's not a demon in the conventional pitchfork and horn sense, nothing so comfortingly simple. It's vaster, older, an intelligence or a force from the unimaginable blackness between the stars, a being whose very thoughts could unravel reality, like a poorly knitted sweater. We are not merely its jailers, little mouse, Malachi would whisper, his smile a death's head grin. We are its interpreters, its intermediaries. We offer it distractions, appeasements, lest it turn its gaze fully upon this fragile world, and all of creation curdles in its sight. You realize their eternal vigilance is less about protecting mankind, and more about making sure the eldritch horrors get their snacks and their preferred playlist on time. The evidence of past appeasements, or more chillingly, past failures, is all around you if you have the stomach to look. The walls of your cell and the larger chamber beyond, which you glimpse when your gruel is delivered, are covered in frantic scratchings, the desperate graffiti of previous occupants who clearly didn't make it to the happily ever after part of their monastic journey. Names, dates, pleas for mercy, fragmented prayers, and disturbing, almost childlike drawings of a great, lidless eye or a swirling vortex of tentacles. You find a loose stone in your own cell, and behind it, a single desiccated fingerbone, clearly gnawed. Your appetite, already suppressed by the quality of the Abbey's cuisine, vanishes completely. Sometimes Brother Thomas will drag another unfortunate soul past your cell, usually one of the Abbey's own monks, his face a mask of gray terror, his whimpers quickly silenced. You never see them again. You are clearly not the first to fall, afoul of the Priory's unique management style. Blackwood Abbey's Advanced Theological Studies program apparently includes practical demonology, advanced screaming, and a surprisingly high staff turnover rate. This isn't just a prison, it's a processing center. And you're starting to get a very bad feeling about what exactly is being processed, and for what ultimate, terrifying purpose. Then comes the dawning, horrific realization that they have a specific role in mind for you. You are not just being punished for your insatiable curiosity, or your anachronistic tendency to question why a vow of silence doesn't apply to snoring. No, your unique qualities, perhaps your very otherness, your mind not yet entirely steeped in medieval superstition, or maybe just the fact that you were conveniently available and expendable, have made you a candidate for something special. The prior himself visits you, his ancient eyes alight with a chilling, almost paternalistic fervor. "You have been chosen, my child," he rasps, "and you really wish he'd stop calling you that, as it usually precedes something deeply unpleasant. You, who have glimpsed the precipice, who have felt the breath of the outer dark, you are to be an ambassador, a bridge." He speaks of an upcoming celestial alignment, a time when the veil between worlds grows thin, a conjunction of whispers, he calls it, with a poetic flair that is entirely at odds with the abject terror it inspires. In you, a new voice is needed, he continues, a fresh conduit. The old ways grow weak, the guardian stirs. You don't know who or what this guardian is, but it sounds less like a benevolent protector and more like the kind of entity that eats galaxies for breakfast and uses black holes as toothpicks. You are, it seems, about to become a key ingredient in their spiritual wellness smoothie from hell, a pivotal piece in their cosmic chess game where the pawns are souls and the stakes are the sanity of the entire planet. Your promotion from nosy guest to interdimensional envoy, unpaid internship, high probability of soul annihilation, is not the career advancement you were hoping for. The psychological torment is relentless, a deliberate campaign to unravel your sanity before the main event. The chanting from the depths below your cell becomes more constant, its dissonant harmonies seeming to scrape directly against your brain. The shadows in your cell writhe and coalesce into impossible fleeting shapes when you stare too long. Your meager food rations are sometimes different. You'll find strange herbs mixed into your gruel that leave you disoriented, your perceptions skewed, your dreams filled with terrifying, half-glimpsed landscapes of alien geometries and whispering, unseen presences. Brother Malachi continues his visits, not just taunting you with forbidden knowledge, but asking insidious, probing questions, trying to pick apart your understanding of reality, to find the cracks in your psyche and widen them. He speaks of the bliss of dissolution, the joy of surrendering the fragile ego to the vastness of the all undone. It's like being trapped in a self-help seminar run by a particularly enthusiastic nihilistic cult leader with a PhD in existential dread. They are not just breaking your body. They are trying to dismantle your mind, to hollow you out and make you a more receptive vessel for whatever cosmic horror they plan to pour into you. The sheer, overwhelming scale of their ambition, their madness, is terrifying. This isn't just some backwater cult dabbling in forbidden arts. Blackwood Abbey is a festering wound on the skin of reality, a place where humanity's desperate bargains with the darkness are played out in an endless, horrifying cycle. And you lucky, lucky individual, are about to take center stage in their next grand, terrible production. The preparations, you sense with a cold, gut-wrenching certainty, are about to begin. The preparations turn out to be even less pleasant than you'd imagined, which, given your recent experiences, is saying something quite profound. You're not entirely sure how much time passes in the cold, stinking darkness of your subterranean prison. It could be hours. It could be days. Your only markers are the infrequent deliveries of stale bread and water, sometimes tasting faintly of those disorienting herbs again, and the increasingly frequent, terrifyingly close sounds of the ritualistic chanting and that deep, bone-jarring hum from the main chamber. Then, one morning, or whatever passes for it in this lightless hellhole, the heavy door to your cell groans open, not with Brother Malachi's usual sneering visage, but with two hulking, black-robed figures you don't recognize, their faces hidden deep within the cowls of their robes, their silence somehow more menacing than any threat. You're not invited. You're dragged, your feeble struggles as effective as a moth trying to headbutt a battering ram. You are hauled, scraping and stumbling, back into that vast central chamber with the disturbing stone slab altar. The scene that greets your already Traumatized eyes is like something clawed from the most fevered, cheese-induced nightmare. The entire inner circle of the Ordo Umbrarum Nigrarum is present, perhaps a dozen figures in all, including the prior, Brother Malachi, and Brother Thomas, all clad in those midnight black robes, their faces pale and drawn in the flickering, unholy light of numerous braziers that burn with a sickly greenish-purple flame, casting monstrous elongated shadows that writhe and dance upon the symbol-covered walls as if alive. The air is thick, cloying, vibrating with a palpable, almost physical energy that makes your hair stand on end and your teeth ache. The chanting is constant now, a looping, hypnotic drone in that guttural, alien tongue, rising and falling in waves, punctuated by the clang of unseen cymbals and the deep thrum of a hidden drum that seems to beat in time with your own terrified, galloping heart. You've been cordially invited to Blackwood Abbey's annual staff retreat, and it looks like the main agenda item is existential horror and you. You are stripped of your ragged novice's tunic, no point in modesty when you're about to become an interdimensional chew toy, and forced onto the cold, unyielding surface of the stone slab altar. Rough ropes, smelling faintly of mildew and old fear, are used to bind your wrists and ankles to iron rings set into the stone. You are spread-eagled, exposed, utterly helpless, a particularly unappetizing human sacrifice awaiting the inevitable. The prior stands at the head of the altar, holding one of those dark, pulsating books from the forbidden library, its pages seemingly turning themselves in the unholy draught. He begins to read, or rather, to incant, his voice, usually dry and rustling, now taking on a strange, resonant power, each syllable a hammer blow against your sanity. Brother Malachi stands beside him, occasionally anointing your forehead or chest with a pungent, oily substance from a carved obsidian bowl, muttering phrases that you don't understand but which make your skin crawl with a primal revulsion. Brother Thomas and the others sway and chant, their eyes glazed, lost in some ecstatic, terrifying trance. You realize, with a clarity that is both horrifying and strangely liberating, that this is it. This is your grand purpose, your chosen role. You are the focal point, the sacrifice, the unwilling key that will unlock something. The conjunction of whispers the prior spoke of is clearly happening, and you are the main event, the screaming headline on the cosmic front page. Your medieval performance art piece is about to get very real, and the critics, you suspect, are going to be universally terrifying. As the ritual reaches its crescendo, the very air in the chamber seems to crackle and split. The greenish-purple flames in the braziers leap impossibly high, casting fleeting, terrifying glimpses of shapes moving just beyond the edges of your vision. The symbols carved into the walls and on the altar itself begin to glow with an internal, sickly light, pulsing in time with the chanting and the deep thrumming that now feels like it's shaking the very foundations of the abbey, and perhaps the world. The temperature plummets, a biting, unnatural cold seeping into your bones, even as sweat, or perhaps just sheer terror-induced condensation, pours from your skin. That shimmering distortion you saw in the tower? It's back, but this time it's not confined to a distant circle. It's forming above you, directly over the altar, a roiling, incandescent tear in the fabric of reality. And through that tear, you feel it. The presence, that vast, ancient, utterly alien intelligence from beyond the stars, its attention now fully, horribly focused. You don't see it with your eyes, not in any conventional sense. Your mind simply couldn't process such a thing. But you feel it. A crushing, overwhelming wave of pure, undiluted otherness. A consciousness so vast and so fundamentally different that it makes your own thoughts feel like the meaningless chirping of insects. It's a tidal wave of cold, ancient thoughts, of unknowable desires, of an alien hunger that has nothing to do with physical sustenance and everything to do with consuming something you can't even name. It's the abyss, not just gazing back, but leaning in for a very close, very personal, and deeply unsettling sniff. You try to scream, but your throat is paralyzed, your lungs refusing to draw breath. This is beyond fear. This is the kind of existential horror that dissolves the very concept of self. In that final, terrible moment, as the unholy energy of the ritual peaks and the presence from beyond bears down upon you, a strange, detached clarity pierces through your terror. You see the faces of the monks, contorted in expressions of ecstatic madness or abject fear. You see the prior, his eyes wide and shining with a terrifying, triumphant light, and you understand. They're not in control. They were never in control. They're just deluded fools, playing with cosmic fire, believing they can bargain with forces that view humanity as less than dust motes. They talk of balance, of pacts, but they're just terrified children whistling in the dark, offering up sacrifices like you to temporarily appease an entity that will, eventually, inevitably, consume everything. Perhaps you try one last, futile, act of defiance, a spat curse, a mental middle finger to the universe. Or maybe your mind simply retreats, snapping under the unbearable pressure, seeking refuge in the blessed oblivion of madness. It doesn't matter. The outcome is the same. The energy from the rift above you, that conduit to unspeakable things, lances down, and your world dissolves into an incandescent screaming agony that is also, somehow, a profound, terrifying understanding of things no human mind was ever meant to comprehend. Your consciousness, your sense of self, your carefully curated collection of modern sensibilities and sarcastic retorts, all of it is unraveled, shredded, and consumed by the vast, indifferent hunger of that which lies beyond the veil. You are a bridge, as the prior promised, and like all bridges, you are ultimately trodden upon and forgotten. Whether the ritual succeeded in their eyes, whether the guardian was appeased or further enraged, whether the conjunction of whispers brought them the power they craved, or just a more intimate acquaintance with cosmic indigestion, you'll never know. Your part in this medieval drama of eldritch horror is over. Your personal experience of the Shadow Priory and its whispered secrets has reached its predictably gruesome and utterly final conclusion. What remains of you, if anything, is now just another forgotten stain on the ancient stones of Blackwood Abbey. Another silent testament to the terrifying truth that some doors are best left unopened, some secrets best left unwhispered. So, the next time you're stuck in traffic, or your Wi-Fi is buffering, or your barista spells your name wrong on your overpriced latte, just take a deep cleansing breath of that lovely, unsulfurous, non-eldritch modern air. Be grateful for your boring, predictable, demon-free existence. Because, as you've just so vividly experienced, there are far, far worse ways to spend your time than enduring the minor irritations of the 21st century. Trust me on this one. You really, really wouldn't want to be you back then. Especially, not at Blackwood Abbey during their annual Meet the Great Old Ones mixer. That's one networking event you definitely want to decline.